It's divine shenanigans, holy hilarity, where grace meets grit and sanctified clarity. With Brynn on the mic and truth in her hands, she's breaking down the Bible with laughter and a plan. It's divine, oh, it's divine shenanigans.
Hey friend, welcome back to Divine Shenanigans, where faith is real, life is messy, and obedience does not come with a coupon code. Today we're talking about obedience, not the cute Instagram quote version, not the I obeyed God by liking a Christian post version. I'm talking about the kind of obedience that ruins your schedule, exposes your pride, interrupts your plans, makes you say, God, respectfully, no. And he says, lovingly, yes. Before we dig in, let me tell you about something new that I am really excited about. I just started a free school community for Divine Shenanigans. This is where we walk through episode guides, have daily discussion questions, pray through real-life struggles, share morning and evening prayers, do journal prompts, and talk about the stuff we don't always get to unpack on this podcast. If you have ever thought, I wish I had people to process faith with, without pretending I have it all together, this space is for you. You can find it at school.com, Divine Shenanigans. School is spelled Skool. All right, let's get uncomfortable together. Let's be honest. We love God, we trust God, we worship God. But obedience, that's where we start negotiating. We're fine with obedience as long as it aligns with our personality, it fits our calendar, it doesn't embarrass us, it doesn't require humility, and it doesn't make us look less healed than we'd prefer. We want God-approved plans, not God-interrupted plans. But obedience almost always shows up as, this doesn't make sense to you, but it makes sense to me. And that's where the tension lives. Let me be honest with you for a minute. I am not against obedience. I just prefer obedience with advance notice. I like it when God gives me a timeline, a reason, a confirmation text, a backup plan, and maybe a Google Doc outlining how this is going to turn out. But that's not usually how God works. Because if he showed us the whole plan, we'd argue with him, for sure. There was a season where I had a plan that made sense. It was organized, it was prayer adjacent, it was responsible, and it looked faithful from the outside. And I was proud of it. You know that kind of pride that says, look how mature I'm being, God. I wasn't asking God what he wanted. I was asking him to bless what I had already decided. And I even prayed about it, which is wild because prayer doesn't automatically equal surrender. Sometimes prayer is just us narrating our plans out loud and hoping God nods politely. God didn't interrupt me dramatically. No thunder, no burning bush, no neon sign. Just a quiet, persistent nudge. That still annoying whisper that says, this isn't it. And I did what any spiritually creative person does. I ignored it. I said, yeah, I'll revisit that later. I need more clarity. I'm waiting on peace. I'm just being wise. But let's call it what it really was. I wasn't waiting on peace. I was waiting on comfort. This is where obedience gets awkward because I started negotiating. I told God, I'll obey if you explain why. I'll obey once it feels easier. I'll obey if it doesn't make me look foolish. I'll obey after I fix a few things first. And God was quiet, not because he was mad, but because he had already answered. Here's the thing we don't talk about enough in church. You can delay obedience and still look spiritual. You can say, I'm praying about it. And what it really means is, I hope God changes his mind. You can stay busy serving God around the thing he asked you to do. You can worship passionately while avoiding the one yes he's waiting on. And I realized something uncomfortable. My delay was not wisdom. It was fear wearing church clothes. One day, nothing dramatic, I just felt this weight. Not condemnation, not guilt. Clarity. That quiet knowing you already know what I asked you to do. And I remember thinking, God, this is inconvenient. It messed with my timeline, my comfort, my pride, my carefully curated image of having it all together. And that's when it hit me. God wasn't trying to ruin my plans. He was trying to free me from them. Can I say this? I have to. Sometimes obedience doesn't feel brave. It feels small, awkward, unimpressive. There was no applause when I said yes. No instant relief, no magical clarity, just obedience. And that's when I learned God doesn't reward obedience with immediate comfort. He rewards it with His presence. Obedience cost me control, certainty, the ability to explain myself easily. It cost me being admired. It cost me sticking with what was familiar just because it was familiar. But it gave me something better. Peace that didn't depend on outcomes. Freedom from needing to manage everything. And a deeper trust in God. Not just belief about Him, but reliance on Him. God didn't ask for my comfort. He asked for my trust. I'll say it again. God didn't ask for my comfort. He asked for my trust. And here's the wild part. Once I obeyed, I realized I wasn't losing anything God wasn't already asking to heal. So let me ask you something gently. What has God been nudging you about? And what have you been delaying because it interrupts your plans, threatens your pride, makes you uncomfortable, doesn't come with guarantees? Friend, delayed obedience still weighs on the heart. And God isn't rushing you, but He is inviting you. And here's the good news. You are not the only one who struggles with this. In fact, some of the most faithful people I know are wrestling with obedience right now, in quiet, ordinary, deeply human ways. Let me tell you some of their stories. One of the most beautiful things about walking faith out together is realizing you are not the only one wrestling with obedience. Not the only one hesitating, not the only one bargaining, not the only one saying, God, I love you, but can we circle back to this later? Obedience doesn't usually show up with fireworks. It shows up in ordinary moments where no one is watching. So let's get into a few community stories. Real life, real faith, real courage. One person shared that God nudged them to apologize to someone they were technically right with. You know that kind of right that comes with receipts, screenshots, emotional PowerPoint slides? They said, God, I didn't do anything wrong. And God didn't argue. He said, go anyway. That apology wasn't about admitting guilt. It was about choosing humility over pride. And the wild part? That apology didn't fix everything immediately, but it freed their heart from needing to win. Sometimes obedience isn't about changing the situation. It's about changing us. Another person shared about stepping away from something that wasn't bad, but wasn't right anymore. A role, a relationship, a rhythm of life. They said, I didn't leave because it was toxic. I left because God said, this season is over. That kind of obedience hurts differently. Because there's no villain, no dramatic reason, just a quiet ending. And endings, even the holy ones, still hurt. Another person shared how God nudged them to serve quietly without recognition. No platform, no spotlight, no applause. Just showing up faithfully. And they admitted, I wanted to be seen. I wanted affirmation. I wanted someone to notice. But obedience asked them to trust God with their unseen faithfulness. God sees what people miss. This next one hit me. Someone said God told them to rest, and they fought it. Because rest felt lazy, rest felt irresponsible, rest didn't look spiritual, but exhaustion had been masquerading as devotion. And obedience looked like saying no, logging off, sleeping, letting go of the pressure to prove something. Sometimes obedience isn't doing more for God. It's trusting Him enough to stop. The next person shared how God nudged them to speak truth, but not loudly, not dramatically, not defensively, just honestly. They were afraid of being misunderstood, rocking the boat, losing connection. But obedience didn't require confrontation. It required courage. And they said afterwards, I didn't say everything I wanted. I just said what God asked. And that was enough. Every one of these stories has something in common. Obedience didn't look impressive. It looked faithful. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't Instagram ready. It was real. And here's the truth we don't hear enough. Small obedience still counts. In fact, it's often the small yeses that prepare us for the bigger ones. You don't need a platform to obey God. You don't need an audience. You don't need certainty. You just need willingness. So let me ask you, what small act of obedience has God been nudging you toward? A conversation, a boundary, a rest, a step forward, maybe a step back. If you feel seen right now, that's not accidental. God is always more present in the ordinary than we expect. So here is what I love. These community stories, they aren't new. They're echoes. Because long before us, before podcasts, group chats, and school communities, God was asking ordinary people for inconvenient yeses. So let's look at Scripture and see how obedience has always been lived out by real, flawed, human people. Here's something we don't say out loud enough. If obedience was always easy, we wouldn't need faith, because faith shows up before understanding. Obedience shows up before comfort, and trust shows up before proof. Let's talk about a few people who were asked for a yes that hurt. Not hurt like stub your toe hurt like rearrange your life hurt. We're going to start with Abraham. Go, and I will show you. God comes to Abraham and says, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. Notice what God doesn't say. He doesn't say how long it will take, where exactly he was going, what the outcome would be, and what he'd lose along the way. God just says, go. And Abraham goes. Let's not rush past that. Abraham leaves familiar land, family systems, cultural identity, security. He leaves what's known for what's promised, but not yet explained. This is obedience without clarity, and that kind of obedience feels irresponsible to people who like control. Abraham had to obey before God showed him the destination, which means no GPS, no 5-year plan, no proof this wasn't a mistake. Just trust. And here's the part that messes with us. Abraham didn't obey because it was comfortable. He obeyed because he trusted who was asking. Some of us are actually stuck right here. God has said go, but we've said show me first, and God says trust me first. Delayed obedience doesn't mean God stops loving you, but it does mean you stay stuck longer than necessary. On to Jonah. Jonah's story is wild because God is clear. No confusion, no mystery, no vague nudge. God said, go to Nineveh. Joseph said, absolutely not. Jonah didn't run because he didn't hear God. He runs because he heard God too clearly. He knew where God was sending him, who God wanted to forgive, what obedience would cost him emotionally. And Jonah's issue wasn't obedience. It was resentment. Jonah didn't want to obey because obedience would challenge his sense of justice, force him to love people he didn't think deserved it, expose the bitterness he hadn't dealt with. So Jonah runs, and God, he lets him. But running does not remove the assignment. It just adds consequences. You can run from obedience, but you can't outrun purpose. God didn't punish Jonah with the fish. He intercepted him, because sometimes God's mercy looks like inconvenience. Jonah eventually obeys, But he's still angry, still bitter, still resistant. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You can obey God outwardly and still resist him inwardly. You can do the right thing with the wrong heart, and God cares about both. Now we have Mary. Mary's obedience didn't just inconvenience her, it endangered her. She was young, engaged, unmarried, and God says, "You will carry my son." Mary knew exactly what this would cost her reputation, her engagement, her safety, her future. This wasn't a private calling. This was public. Mary didn't ask for proof. She didn't ask for protection guarantees. She didn't ask for public understanding. She said, "Let it be unto me according to your word." That's obedience that says, even if I'm misunderstood, I trust you. Obedience doesn't protect your image. It reveals your faith. Mary says yes knowing people would talk, knowing they'd question her character, knowing she wouldn't be able to explain everything. And God trusted her with something holy anyway. Now, we can't talk about obedience without talking about Jesus. In the garden, Jesus prays, "If it's possible, let this cup pass from me." This prayer alone tells us something important. Obedience doesn't just mean pretending things don't hurt. Jesus was honest. He was overwhelmed. And he was human. And then he says, "Yet not my will, but yours be done." That's obedience at the deepest level. Even Jesus wrestled before he surrendered. So if obedience feels heavy sometimes, you're not weak. You're human. Every one of these stories tells us something. Abraham teaches us obedience without explanation. Jonah teaches us obedience delayed with resistance. Mary teaches us obedience that risks reputation. Jesus shows us obedience that trusts God completely. And none of them were comfortable. Obedience often hurts, not because God is cruel, but because surrender costs what we're clinging to. Now here's the part I love. God doesn't ask for obedience to break us. He asks for obedience to free us. So how do we actually live this out without burnout, panicking, spiraling every time God nudges us? Let's talk about some practical ways to practice obedience in real life. Let me say this out loud, because some of you need to hear it clearly. Obedience is not meant to make you panic. If your first reaction to obedience is anxiety, spiraling, or shame, that's not God rushing you. That's fear talking. God doesn't drive with urgency. He walks with intention. So let's talk about how to practice obedience in a way that keeps your soul grounded instead of overwhelmed. Tip number 1, start with the next right step. One of the biggest reasons obedience feels terrifying is because we try to obey all at once. God says, take one step, and what we hear? Figure out your entire future. Friend, God is not asking you to solve your whole life today. He's asking you to take the next right step. Not 5 steps, not the end result, not the outcome. Just the next faithful yes. You don't need clarity for the whole journey. You need courage for the next step. Tip number 2, check your resistance. What is it protecting? When you feel resistance, don't shame it. Get curious. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of losing? What am I trying to protect? What story am I telling myself about this obedience? Because resistance often points to a wound, a fear, a false belief, or an area God wants to heal, not punish. Obedience doesn't bulldoze your heart. It invites you to understand it. Tip number 3, learn the difference between fear and wisdom. This one matters. Fear says something bad will happen, and wisdom says, let's move carefully with God. Fear rushes where wisdom pauses. Fear causes catastrophes. Wisdom discerns. Fear isolates. Wisdom seeks counsel. If obedience feels chaotic and frantic, that's fear. If it feels steady, even when it's uncomfortable, that's wisdom. God doesn't demand reckless obedience. He invites anchored obedience. Tip number 4, stop waiting for peace that feels like comfort. This one might mess with us a little bit. We often say, I'm waiting for peace. But what we mean is I'm waiting for it to feel easy. Peace does not always feel like comfort. Sometimes peace feels like quiet resolve. Sometimes peace feels like, I don't love this, but I trust God. Obedience doesn't always come with emotional relief. It often comes with spiritual alignment. Tip number 5, God rarely explains himself before he proves himself. We want explanations when God offers relationship. We want guarantees. God offers presence. If God explained everything up front, we wouldn't need trust. We'd need confirmation. And faith isn't built on explanations. It's built on experience. Obedience is how trust gets practiced, not proven. Number 6, obey in small, quiet ways first. You don't need a dramatic leap. Start small. One honest conversation, one boundary, one act of rest, one prayer, one apology, one step back, one step forward. Small obedience builds spiritual muscle, and muscle memory matters when bigger yeses come. Number 7, stop comparing your obedience to someone else's. Your obedience will not look like theirs. God speaks uniquely. He leads personally. Someone else's obedience might look bold. Yours might look hidden. Someone else's might go. You might stay. Someone else might speak. You might be silent. Obedience is not a competition. It's a conversation between you and God. Number 8, obey even when you don't feel spiritual. Let's be real. Some days obedience happens when you're tired, you're unsure, you're emotionally worn down, and you don't feel holy enough. Obedience is not fueled by spiritual highs. It's sustained by faithfulness. God honors consistency more than intensity. Obedience is not about being impressive. It's about being available. I'll say it again slower. Obedience is not about being impressive. It's about being available. If you've delayed obedience, you haven't failed. If you've wrestled, you're not weak. If you're unsure, God is patient. God doesn't need perfect obedience. He invites willing obedience.
What if the most powerful thing about you is not what you do, but it's the energy you bring into a room? I'm Kathy Heller, and I host Everything is Energy. You're going to hear conversations about how your energy shapes every part of your life, your abundance, your relationships, your creativity, your sense of peace, because this isn't about hustle or forcing change. It's about knowing that when your energy changes, your life immediately responds. Listen to Everything is Energy with Kathy Heller wherever you get your podcasts.
So now that we've talked about what obedience isn't, panic, pressure, or performance, let's talk about how we respond. Not with guilt, not with fear, but with intention. I've got a little holy homework for you this week. This week I want you to journal. Where have I been delaying obedience? Ask God, what yes am I avoiding because it's uncomfortable? Practice one small act of obedience, even if no one sees it, and release the outcome. Before we move towards prayer, before we wrap this up, I want to sit for a moment, because obedience does something to us. It stirs things up. It exposes what we've been carrying. It kicks up dust. And sometimes after all the wrestling, after the conviction, after the, oh, wow, that's me moments, we don't need more words. We need something that meets us underneath all of it. And that's where this week's song comes in. Our song of the week is Beneath the Dust, Divine. This song was written for the moments when faith feels worn down, obedience feels heavy. You're tired of trying to look put together, and you just need the reminder that God still sees you. not the version you're presenting, not the version that has answers, the real one. Obedience has a way of stripping us. It peels back pride, pretense, perfection, performance faith, and what's left can feel dusty. But dust is where God has always done his best work. Creation started in the dust. Healing happened in the dirt. Redemption met us on the ground. This song is a reminder that even when obedience feels messy, God is present, especially there. At the end of this episode, you'll hear the full version of Beneath the Dust, Divine. I encourage you, don't rush off. Let the song play, let it settle, and let it speak where words have worn thin. And if you want to explore more, you can find lyric videos for all of my music on YouTube under Brynn Elise Music. They're there for reflection, prayer, or just sitting quietly with God. As we prepare to pray, I want you to remember this. Obedience doesn't always feel clean. Sometimes it feels like kneeling instead of standing tall, letting go instead of holding on, trusting God in the middle of uncertainty. And that can leave us feeling exposed. But God doesn't shy away from dusty faith. He meets us there. You don't have to be polished to be faithful. You don't have to have it figured out to be obedient. You don't have to be strong to be held. God works beneath the dust. So as you listen to this song at the end of the episode, let go of pressure, release performance, breathe deeply, and remember, you are seen even here. Let this song carry what you can't put into words. Now let's pray together. God, we confess we like control. We like comfort. We like plans that make us look faithful without requiring surrender. Teach us to say yes, even when it costs us something, even when it humbles us, even when it changes the story we thought we were writing. We trust you more than our plans. We choose obedience over approval. We say yes again. Amen. If this episode spoke to you, please subscribe on YouTube, join us on Facebook at Divine Shenanigans Squad, and also Substack at Divine Shenanigans for reflections and a monthly newsletter. Join the free school community for daily devotionals, prayers, and journal prompts. Help me build that community. It's going to be amazing. And don't forget, Divine Shenanigans airs on Faith Points Broadcasting Network every Thursday at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Download the Faith Points 101 app for music, sermons, and other powerful podcast voices. Until next time, friend, keep the faith, embrace the mess, and don't be surprised when obedience rearranges everything for good.
There's a road that winds through quiet ache, where the footprints fade and the heart might break. But every mile that feels forgotten is held by grace, not left to rot in. You see the beauty in the battered and bruised. You call the wandering holy too. Beneath the dust divine, you've laced the cracks with light. Even in the weary and weary, you whisper you're still mine. When all I see is broken ground, you're planting hope I couldn't find. Beneath the dust divine, there's gold in the ground I tried to curse, healing hidden in the hurt. What felt like ruin was just a clearing for you to start a deeper healing. You take what's buried and raise it again. You write redemption a holy kind of glory in a life that's undefined. When all I see is broken ground, you're planting hope I couldn't find beneath the dust, divine. So I'll keep walking slow and true, for even in the dark